Hey everyone, this is Rachel. Thanks for clicking on my video. And I came in today as a response video to one that I saw Kimberly Frazier do. And the title of her video was something like, can we really forgive people? Can we find forgiveness in our heart? That was the pretty much the crux of the video. And I watched her video, and it hit home in a lot of ways to something that happened with me. And when I first thought about doing this video, I wondered how I would start, and hopefully didn't break down at points. And at first I was going to do it off screen in case I did, but what the hell, Then I thought about it again, whether I would wait and do the video, because right now I have a lot of things going on in my life, and I'm feeling like a little sad and a little anxious and just a lot of things going on. But I figured, with everything that's going on, hell, this was as good a time as any. So, forgiveness. I'm going to tell you a little story about something that occurred in my life that changed my life, in some ways for the good and in some ways for the bad. And my forgiveness story involves someone that I was romantically involved with. This was my ex, and pretty much, let me give you a little background. So I met him when I was 22 or 23 years old. And when I think about, how they say love at first sight and all of that, it was truly love at first sight. Basically, it's like I looked across the room one day. I used to work with him, and I looked across the room one day, and I remember he looked up and he smiled at me and like winked his eye. And in that moment, there was like electrical currents running between us. The person that I was speaking to, when I actually turned to look across the room at him, told me, afterwards, that she was talking to me, and I just blanked out looking at him. And she said something like, "Oh my God, what do we have going on here?" It was that instantaneous. And from that moment on, pretty much I was his, for all intent and purposes. We got together, and we were together for 17 years, okay? In that time, we had some happy times, and we had some really rough times. And a lot of it I don't talk about because it's too painful. Sometimes I'll tell family members, this portion of it or that portion of it, but I never tell the whole story, and I never will, because some things should be left unsaid. But what I will say is this: I went through a lot of pain during that relationship, a lot of pain. There was a lot of infidelity in that relationship. A bunch. I used to jokingly say he loved the ladies and the ladies loved him. I had my heart broke more than I care to remember. Looking back now that I'm older, you ask yourself, why did you stay? Why did you keep accepting him back, when he was hurting you? And honestly, the only defense I have is that I loved him. That's it. That's the only defense I have. You do stupid things when you call yourself in love, and that's the only defense you have. because there were several incidences that occurred that I should have left and never looked back. So I mentioned that we had been together 17 years. Eventually, it came to the point where I did leave, and I moved to a totally different city. You know, basically packed my kids up and hit the road, and we moved to another city. Because I almost felt like if me and him was going to break up, I couldn't live in the same city with him. I couldn't risk like running into him with other women. My heart wouldn't be able to take that. So what I did is I packed up and moved to another city. Basically, it's the city that I live in now. Now, you know how after you break up with someone, you know, they call you or they come around and then they talk you into reconciling. Basically saying stuff like, you know, I can do better. You know, this may be a brand new start for us. Let's try this again. And you basically fall for it. That's what happened to me. So I let him come live with me in the new city that I lived in. And about 4 months, 5 months in, I realized that nothing had changed but the date. And I told him that I would like for him to leave my house. Because, you know, he wasn't in it for the same reasons that I was. And I realized that, you know, I was being stupid. And that I had allowed too much to happen between us, and he didn't really have any respect for me. So eventually he left, and then we went through the whole child support thing, and you know, just the things that he did to me and my children, you know, during that time after he left, was really bad. There are so many stories that I can tell you of things that I asked him to do that he just wouldn't do, and he made it hard for me. It's kind of hard to talk about him because he is deceased now, and you don't want to talk ill of the dead. But in keeping with the theme of what Kimberly started with her video, you know, it made me just think about it. He was at times very mean to us. And I mean, when I say us, I mean me and my kids. At some points when he was being mean, you know, you almost wonder, was this the same person that you used to lay beside night after night, year after year, 17 years? How could someone who had told you over and over and over again that he loved you, you were his extra rib, you were the woman that God created for him, and blah, blah, blah. How could they then leave you and hurt not only you, but your children? Things were said to my kids that, when I think about it, it makes my blood boil. Things were done to my kids that, you know, as a mother, you know, your job is to protect them. They were not in my, you know, they weren't around me when these things occurred. I only found out about some of the stuff after he passed. Then he found, you know, another woman, and he got married. Shortly after him and I broke up, he started dating this one woman, and they eventually got married. So when he got with her, then it was like they were tag teaming us, you know, just doing things that were really bad, hurting my daughter, causing her to cry, and just being inconsiderate. And it was very hurtful, very hurtful. I spent many a day basically talking to my kids about this whole situation, trying to make sure that they were okay, and you know, just basically as a mother, making excuses for what was being done to them. Basically, I would say, he still loves you. He's just going through something right now. Don't take what he's doing as, who he is. Look past that. He's a good person underneath. Basically, I was trying to make sure that they didn't hate him eventually because of some of the things that he was doing. Um, I don't know if his family will ever see this, and I have a good relationship with them, and I want to keep it that way, for my daughter. I don't want to mess up what she has, with them. So if they're watching this, this is in no way, shape, form, or fashion to bash him, but it's about forgiveness. Um, this went on, some of the things that him and his new wife, because he eventually got married, did to me and my kids, was really, really bad at times. Even one time, the new wife threatened to beat me up. What had happened is my daughter had gone over there and something had occurred, and it was time for my daughter to go over there for the weekend. And then my ex had put a stipulation on it, like the only way she can come over is if she apologizes to, well, at the time it was his fiance, they weren't married yet. So I was like, well, what happened? And my daughter explained that she had been calling over there every day after school for 3 weeks, and she realized that they weren't giving him her messages. So the last time that she called, I guess she kind of went off on them. And he wanted her to apologize. And, the argument was, well, wait a minute. Did your wife admit, or your fiance admit, that our daughter had been calling for 3 weeks and they never gave you the message? They only gave you the message when she finally had had enough and she told them off. They gave you that message, but they never gave you any of the other message. So one thing led to another. We ended up in a big argument. His fiance picked up the phone and proceeded to cuss me out and threatened to come over my house and whoop my ass. So I told her that she knew where I lived at. I didn't know where she lived at, but she was welcome at any time to bring her ass over, and we'll do it. Now, while I was waiting for her to come, I went and got every knife that I had in my house, and I went out on the curb of where I lived. I planted them in the dirt. I made a path all around me, so if I miss this knife, I can get this one, because if they came over with some bullshit, I was going to cut both of them every which way but loose. So after that, there were birthdays that, passed, and holidays and Christmases where he didn't call her or he didn't do what he was supposed to do. And just, the whole thing that when there's a baby daddy, I hate that expression, but when there's a baby daddy, those things happen. Now, this went on and on, off and on for years, because my daughter, who's the youngest, she basically wanted her daddy and she wanted to be around him. So whatever she had to endure, unbeknownst to me, she would endure just so she could spend the weekend with her dad. Meaning that she would go over there and things would happen and she would never tell me about it. She didn't tell me, again, a lot of this stuff until after he died. So eventually, the house that I lived in, I was moving. My son had turned 21 and he was going to be moving out. And then we had this house and I was thinking, who's going to be cutting all this grass? Who's going to be cleaning these gutters? Who's going to be shoveling all this snow? Who's going to be doing all this maintenance around this house? So I decided that it was too much for me to maintain. So I took my daughter, who's the youngest, she's 8 years younger than my son, and we moved to like a townhome community where they do, things for you. Now, before I moved, I told him, well, actually, after I moved, I called him and I said, we have moved. This is the new numbers that you can reach our daughter at. You're welcome to call anytime you want. Him and I surprisingly had a civil conversation. We actually talked for 2 hours. So I thought when I hung up, I felt good about it, and I was just, so sure that, whatever had gone on, because we had talked, it would make things better for my daughter. Now, after that, we didn't hear from him for a month. So what I did is I called him back the next month, and I asked him, I said, well, I gave you the numbers, and I told you, that you can call at any time. And I had told our daughter that I spoke to you and that I thought things would be better because you and I had spoke. Hold on, everybody. I got to put my charger in my computer. It must have came out when I was moving it. Okay, so I told him that, I talked to our daughter and she was under an impression that you were going to call, blah, blah, blah. So he went into this whole thing about how he's busy. He'll get to it. He can't believe that I'm calling him, pressing him, and just we ended up in an argument. And I ended the argument by saying I did not call you for that. Basically, I was just calling to let you know that your daughter was waiting to hear from you, and I gave you the numbers and I thought you were going to call. Now, I don't know if when I called, his woman was around and he was fronting for her by like going off on me, because when he went off, it was like unreasonable because I only asked him, why didn't he call? And I didn't do it like in a accusatory way because we had a good conversation the previous time. It was more in I'm surprised you didn't, because we got off on a good foot the last time we talked. Now, after that, we actually didn't hear from him for 2 years. Basically, he never called again. He never tried to contact us again. I had the same cell phone number, so he wouldn't have had any problem contacting me. I actually still have the same cell phone number to this day. And at the time, my daughter was 13 or 14, maybe 14, and she's now 22. So that tells you how long I've had the same cell phone number. So we stay in the house that me and my daughter moved to for 2 years. And then we move again, because I learned that I have a teenager and I need a house with a finished basement so she can have company at home and she's not always going away to visit her little boyfriends and all of that. So we moved to another house. Now, by this time, I had lost contact with him. Remember, he didn't call for 2 years. And after he cussed me out the last time that I called, I just said, forget it. He has the number. If he wants to call, he will call. I'm not going to call him and beg him anymore. So we go on with life, me and my daughter. She's going through her teenage years. She's about 16 or 17. I get this message on Facebook that it is very important that I call this number to get in touch with my ex. So I wonder what's going on. It's first thing in the morning, and I just signed on to Facebook, and I saw this message. So I sat there for a second, and I debated, and the reason why I debated is because it seemed like every time he came into our lives, he wreaked havoc. And then after he blew out of our lives, I was left to repair all the damage that he had done to my daughter's psyche. Because when these fathers disappoint these kids, the parent that's left there with them has to clean up all the emotional stuff that has been done to that child. And also, I had to do it in a way that did not alienate her from her father. I never wanted her to hate her dad or have resentment for her dad. So when I was trying to clean up all the damage that he did when he came into our lives, I would always tell her good stories about him, funny stories about him, sweet things that he did, just trying to make sure that I didn't do anything that could one day be said, Rachelle turned Amber against her dad. I didn't want that. I didn't want that, because what I realized, and this is where forgiveness came in, is he was not a bad guy. He was not, even despite all of his cheating, despite, all of the infidelity, inside, in the core of who he was not a bad guy. He just wasn't a good guy for me. And that's where forgiveness came in. And when, over the years after me and him broke up, this is how I forgave him. I thought about that me and him had got together when we were young. He basically didn't get a chance to sow his wild oats, because when I met him, I'm older than him. When I met him, he was 19 years old. And this is not an excuse for him, but this is what helped me to forgive him. What I thought about is he was 19 years old. He really didn't get a chance to sow his wild oats. Basically, he grew up or grew into manhood with me. And what I believed is that as he got older, he wanted to sample something else. He had been with me since he was 19. And again, I'm not giving him an excuse, but because now I have a son and I understand a little bit more about men, I understand that he should have been sowing his wild oats all through his 20s, but he was with me. Okay. So that helped me forgive him. So that brings me to this day where I logged on to Facebook and there was a message urgent that I get in touch with him. There was no, this was no game. It was very important. Please don't ignore this message. Please get in touch with him. So I was sitting there debating because of all that had transpired, wondering, oh my God, am I about to bring him back in my life? And then he, wreaks havoc with my daughter again, blah, blah, blah. But something in me, read this message over and over, and the urgency of the message made me go ahead and call. So when I called the number, he picked up, and I guess he could, he had caller ID, and he could see that it was me. And when he picked up, he said, Rachelle, what made you call me? And I said, well, there was this message on Facebook, telling me that it was urgent that I get in touch with you and blah, blah, blah. And he started crying. And I said, what's going on? And he told me, Rachelle, they gave me 2 weeks to live. And I was like, oh my God. He told me that what happened is he had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And they had given him 2 weeks to live. He was crying, and he wanted to see the kids. So he asked me, could I bring them to him? Now, by this time, it was almost 3 years since he had been in their lives, since they had heard anything from him. They never had a call, a card, or nothing. Basically, he was just gone for almost 3 years. So I told him, I said, well, I know this is serious, but we have a 16. I don't remember if my daughter was 16 or 17. And at the time, my son was about 24 or so, like that. So I said, I will tell them, but I can't promise that I can make them want to come if they push back. He told me, please, if they did, talk them into coming. Could I please do that for him? Make it better, in other words. And so, because I had forgiven him, years before, I knew that if my kids did give pushback, I was gonna, make sure that they were there. So what I told him is, let me get off, let me get my son on the line, because at the time he was 24 and he didn't live at home, and let me get my daughter. My daughter was asleep. So I got the kids together and basically I told them, and they both broke down. There was no hesitation. They wanted to see him. Um, so we piled in a car. He gave us directions to where he lived, and I took my kids over there. Now, when I got there, I didn't feel comfortable going in the house because of so much stuff that was done to me. Um, I was thinking I'm going to drop my kids off, set up a time to pick them up, and then, I will come back and get them because I just can't, I just can't. I'm not going to deal with his now wife. This woman has threatened to beat me up. Her daughter has beat up my daughter and cut my daughter's lip when my daughter was about 11 years old. Her daughter was 13 or 14, and I think my daughter was 10 or 11, and her daughter whooped my daughter's ass at 10 or 11, and she was a teenager, cut my daughter's lip. So much stuff had happened that I just was like, I don't know about all this. So we pull up. When we were driving there, we were almost to him. And so I had called him to say, we just got off the highway. Which way do we go? Which one of these townhomes do you live in? Blah, blah, blah. The city we live in, all live in a lot of townhomes here. Townhome communities. That's what this city is, kind of made up of, a lot of townhomes. So he directed us to where he lived. He told me that he would be standing outside, blah, blah, blah. So we get there, and he is standing outside, and I don't get out the car. The kids jump out, they go over, hug him, and I sit in the car, waiting for them to come back so I can kind of get, information on when I was to pick him up. So he was like, he always called me Shell. He was like, Shell, you're not going to come in? And I was like, I don't know. I said, too much is happening. He was like, please come in. And then, so I said, okay, but I'm not going to stay long, blah, blah, blah. Y'all, it was so awkward. It was so awkward. Because here I am sitting here. The last time I talked to them, they have cussed me out. It's a lot of stuff that happened that my kids didn't know about because you're trying to protect them, and you don't want them to know all that you've endured so they can have a relationship with this man. So I go in. I only stay for maybe an hour or so because his wife is there. And, I think she knew that this situation was serious, and at this time she couldn't exert all the chaos or create all the chaos that she had done before. And y'all, just as a pause, I don't understand women like that, because what she didn't understand is by the time me and him broke up, it was truly over. There were no illusions anymore for me. Me and him had broke up a couple of times before that, and we break up and then we get back together. We break up and we were never apart for a long time, a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there, till one of us cooled down. But this time, we knew that this breakup was the end. We had basically grown up together, and, a lot of hurt and things were done, and it was on his part, because I can sit here today and everything and say I never cheated on him. I never did anything to him. My only crime was trying to love him. That was it. So when I went in there, even though I knew he was dying, at one point, he was the love of my life. He was a person that I grew up with. He was, I should say, grew into womanhood with. He was my friend. So I really felt sorry for him. And that is what allowed me to walk into that house, the memories of all that. And then I went in, chit-chatted for a little bit, and then Rachel got her ass up and left, because even though, we knew that he was dying, his wife, you can cut the tension with a knife when I walked in the house. So I just left. Eventually I came back and got my kids. By that time, she wasn't there. He invited me in the house again. He talked. He told me how he was sick and she wasn't doing some of the things that she should have been doing. Kind of threw me for a loop because you would think they would present a united front. So I left there thinking, what the hell? Okay. Um, and then I promised him that, I would make sure that the kids, saw him, talk to him, blah, blah, blah. I would smooth it over even more to make this easier on him. So, even though they gave him 2 weeks to live, he actually lived for 2 years after that, almost 2 years. And in those 2 years, there were still things that happened that weren't right, just weren't right. And my daughter, my baby, suffered a lot of hurt during that time. There was no provisions made for her in the event that something happened to him. Absolutely nothing. Zero. Okay? At the time, my daughter was 17 years old, and, she was going to be graduating from high school and going off to college. And, I've been to college, and I went to college with a single mother trying to, make sure I had my books and get my tuition and, all of that. And I know it's hard. And his death and, everything that was going on was traumatic for my daughter because she was trying to get through high school, trying to, pass her ACTs and SATs to get into college. So it was a lot, watching her dad slowly deteriorate. And also having to put up with the little things that his wife would do to hurt my daughter. Let me give you an example. My daughter went on vacation with them, and they went down to South Carolina. I forgot the beach or whatever they went to. It doesn't matter anyway. But my daughter was witness to what she felt was some abuse towards her father, because by this time he was kind of in a wheelchair because he was too weak to walk. And I think he had a catheter on him at times. And there was a time when I guess they were at a restaurant and he wanted help getting up to go to the bathroom. And he was in a wheelchair. And he didn't want to pee on himself or pee into the catheter or whatever he had on him. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what it was. Did he have one of the pens or something and he just didn't want to pee on himself? Let me just tell you, at the time he was probably, he died about 4 years ago, he was probably 44 or 45. So he wasn't old, and he still had his pride about himself. So he didn't want to pee on himself. So he asked or went to get up out of his wheelchair, and I guess wanted assistance getting up to go to the bathroom. My daughter told me that his wife pushed him back in the chair and basically told him, you have on the damn Depends or either catheter, you don't really need to get up. And my daughter was calling me, every day when she was on vacation with them, telling me things that happened. But this is one time that she called me and I was thinking, what the hell? How could he let stuff like this happen to her? When will he ever put his foot down? Because there have been other things that happened that his wife did to my daughter. And, my daughter didn't tell me, and it happened. So what happened is, it was the morning when they were on, it was a morning when they were on vacation. All of them got up and left the hotel to go out for breakfast and for the day. At the time, my daughter was only 16 or 17. She had never been left on her own in a strange city, in a hotel, in a resort, to fend for herself, meaning, how do I get breakfast? How do I get something to eat? You know, blah, blah, blah. So she called me and she said, Mom, I woke up and they were all gone. They didn't wake me up. They just left. And I was like, oh my God. So she was like, I'm hungry. Now, at the time, my daughter had a job. She had her own debit card. She was 16 or 17. So I asked her, did she want me to go ahead and, order, she would find a restaurant or something, because you know how hotels have menus and all that stuff. And she would find a restaurant and I could order and use my card to get her something to eat. And she was like, no, Mom, you just tell me how to do it and I'll get it. So what I told her is, are you in a hotel that there is a front desk? And she said, yes. I said, do not allow them to come up to your room. Tell them that you will come down to the front desk. And that's for safety reasons, because you don't know who these delivery people are. So she ordered breakfast, and that went well. She did the same thing with lunch. And but dinner, the restaurant actually came up to, their delivery person came up to the room. And but my daughter said she felt comfortable opening the door because there were a lot of people in the milling around, because it was a resort. So I was pissed. I was at home. It wasn't anything I could do. My daughter didn't want me to call because she didn't want to cause confusion while she was there with them. And basically some of this kind of went on for the duration. She would be left alone. She would go out on the beach by herself, blah, blah, blah. She spent so much time on the beach, y'all, that when she got back, her back was burned to a crisp. Now, my daughter is lighter skinned, but she's not light skin, if you get what I mean. But it had baked her, because any skin that's exposed to the sun, especially sun down in the south, you're gonna burn. So her back was just completely burned, skin peeling off and everything. But that's so they get back. She tells me more stuff that happened that she didn't tell me when she was on the trip, and she continues on. It's graduation, it's prom. He didn't help with anything for prom, homecoming, any of that. None of that. Even though he had it, he didn't help. I did go get Social Security for her, and because once he was diagnosed, he no longer worked. He was getting Social Security. So I did go get that for her, and that helped me, finish getting her, out of high school, with the prom, the homecoming, all the little things that you get when you're graduating from high school. And my daughter's birthday is in December. So once she turned 18, her check came in her name. You guys know how that worked. So, she continued to get her check for January, February, March, April, May, June. But the moment she turned 18 and she graduated from high school, this check, it stopped. So basically, I was left to get all of the stuff for college. He didn't come to her high school graduation. There was a whole big thing her graduation day. It was so bad that I, who is her mother, was late for my child's graduation. I did not get a chance to see, when they walk in and they're seated and all of that. When we got there, they were talking, the announcers and the people that, talked about their school year and all that. I didn't miss her actually receiving her diploma, but pretty much I missed everything else. Fucking with him. It was a mess, y'all. It was just a mess. So this is June. We continued to have little words and every once in a while, and I was trying, and during this time he had started calling me. He would wait till his wife went to work, because she never stopped working, even though she had a husband at home that was dying, and she could have took FMLA and stayed home because she was a boss and helped take care of him. He didn't have a nurse. They claimed that they made too much, although I told him He said that that's what she told him, although I told him that I work in healthcare and we have people that are making way more money than what she is. And when they have a loved one that's sick, you know, either they pay for private duty nursing, especially when, someone is terminal. I had told him that he can call the American Cancer Society. They may have options to help him. Basically, I was trying to help him. So, he asked me why didn't I call him sometimes? Why didn't I come up to the hospital when he was having, problems? And I basically told him, I said, your wife hates me. And I said, to keep confusion down and to make this as pain-free as possible, it's best that I don't come around. The kids can come, that's fine. So, during this time, he'd asked me about calling him. So one time I said, well, he asked me, I'll go ahead and call him. When I called the motherfucker, God forgive me, he's going to say, oh my God, you got to wait and call it after this time, but after she goes to work. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, this man was with me for 17 years. Now he wants me to sneak and call him when his wife went to work. I told him I wasn't playing games. I'm not calling there. I'm not going to call. I won't not be trying to wait till a certain time to call this motherfucker like I'm cheating on him or something. Child, it was a mess. So we could soldier on. He didn't come to her graduation. He didn't help with anything, when she was going to college. I asked him, could he help me get her a laptop? He never helped. Again, there was no provision made for my daughter in the event of his death. So 2 weeks before she was to go off to college, he called her and he asked her, would she go to breakfast with him? He asked my son also. He actually drove over and picked them up and took them to Bob Evans. They said they had a good time, blah, blah, blah. Next thing we know is Sunday night or Monday morning, we get a call that he is in hospice and things are not looking good. And we're thinking he just drove over here, to pick them up. How did this happen over the weekend? This can't be. So, of course, I drive my kids there, and I'm going to be wrapping this up, y'all. I didn't know I was going to make it this long. Lord have mercy. So I drive my kids there. I don't stay. I just drop them off. Now, prior to this, he had come over my house one time, and he wanted me to forgive him, and this is where the forgiveness comes in. So what I told him is that you don't need to ask me to forgive you. I forgave you years ago, and I explained to him that if I carried around hatred or something like that in my heart for years like that, that it would eat me alive. It wouldn't do anything to him. It would be like a cancer on the inside of me, eating me alive. It would also prevent me from, y'all gotta excuse me. I'm actually hot because I got on a sweatshirt, but it's, how when you're hot, it's making you itch, and I can't take off my sweatshirt while I'm on screen, so it's making me a little itchy. So, basically, I told him that I had forgiven him years ago and that he didn't need to ask for my forgiveness. He basically told me that he believed that the reason why he got sick is because of all the things that he had done to me and the things that I didn't know about, during the time that me and him were together. He also admitted that he should have never left his family, and meaning us. That he made all kind of mistakes in his life and that he was sorry for any pain that he put me through. And I told him, he told me that when I told him that he didn't need to go through all that, I had already forgiven him. He told me that he wanted me to hear me say, I'm not going to say his name. I'll just say John. John, I forgive you. So I said, John, I forgive you. And then basically what he told me is that he needed that. He needed to know that if he was going to die, that I forgave him. So, that was like 2 weeks before he died. So, the next week he went out to, oh yeah, and in that conversation we had, he made me promise that if he's ever in the hospital, that I will come up to the hospital. Again, I told him, your wife is crazy. She doesn't want me up there, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, but I want you there. We've been knowing each other, the same story that I told you guys. Basically, we grew up together. He used to live on the next street from me growing up. He played with my brothers. I just didn't know him as a teenager. I met him as a young adult, so he had been knowing my family since he was a little boy. So we were more than just exes. We were actually friends. So I said, well, okay, if you want me to, I'll come up there, but I really don't think your wife gonna be having this. So that day that I took my kids to the hospice, I didn't go in that day. So he lingered there for a day or two, and then we get the call that it's crucial, that, they think he's not going to make it through the day. So, oh, actually, no, we got the call that he actually passed. I was on my way to work, and it was in the summer. It was August 14th. It was a week before his actual birthday. His birthday was August 20th. And my daughter was home on summer break. And I had just left from work. And when I was driving down the street, I probably was a few houses away. And I got a call from my daughter, Mom, my dad just died. I just pulled up in one of my neighbor's driveways, turned around and went home. Now, in the aftermath of his death, here's what happened. When I went up to the hospital to pay my respects, now this is at one point when he was still lingering, because he had begged me to come there. So my daughter called up there and she said, Mom, his wife has stepped out. You should rush up here now to see him. So I rushed up there, and unfortunately, by the time I made it there, she was back. I walked in the room. She told me to get out. I turned around and left. I didn't cause any problems. I didn't argue. I didn't even say a word. I said, oh, okay. And I turned around and walked back out. And what I said is, I almost said his name. I'll just say, John, wherever you are, I tried. But like I told you, your wife wasn't going to be having it. When I left, I guess my kids went off on her. They told her she was a mean, I guess, they didn't call her a bitch or anything. They're not that kind of kids. But basically, they told her off nicely. Now, once he died, we didn't know if we were going to be allowed to come to the funeral. It was that bad, y'all. But luckily, he had a memorial service in the city that we lived in that my kids were not, they were not privy to, so they didn't go to that. And then he also had a memorial service in the city that we are from, which is Cleveland. So, we went to the one in Cleveland. Again, we weren't sure if we were going to be put out because, she was that bad. We get there, and because it's in Cleveland, now here's all my family. They're 30 deep, strong. They was like, if something go down, we gonna tear this motherfucker up, the funeral home. So I was like, no, whoa, y'all, we not gonna be doing all that. But we go, and in the, when they're eulogizing him, she mentioned all of her kids, her grandkids, as though he was their father. He leaves to mourn his children, and then they named all of her children and grandchildren, and then they named my daughter, but they didn't say my son's name at all. Did you hear what I just said? They named all of her kids, her grandkids, but they didn't say my son's name. And they said my daughter's name after they named all of her. I just don't understand people like that. I am not a vindictive woman. I'm not that person. If I got with a guy and he had kids and, this was a life that he had before me, why would I be jealous of that? And I'm not the type of person, that could be mean to kids. Let me tell y'all the rest of the story. And then I'm going to end this because this shit has been almost an hour, y'all. I didn't intend this. Sorry, Kim. I got to talking and, you know, y'all, I'm long-winded. So remember I said nothing was left to my daughter. Nothing. She was the underage child. Nothing was left. So after his death, they called his wife and they told her that they would like some of his personal belongings. You know, they didn't want, you know, anything monetary. They wanted some clothes, just, you know, things. So she agreed that they can come over and blah, blah, blah. Now, they said that when they got there, they knocked on the door for a while and there was no answer, even though they had to set up an agreed time. And then they said that she pulled up. Evidently, she wasn't there. And she sat in her car a while. And then all they know is all these other cars started pulling up. And it was her family members. I guess she thought that my kids were going to come over there and beat her up. Although they should have with all the shit she did over the years. But they're not like that. They weren't raised that way. So when they get in the house, she basically asked them, they said in a snippy way, well, what do you want? So they said that they didn't know how to take how she was treating them. So they were standing by a basket of dirty clothes and they realized that it was, you know, my ex's. So they asked, could they have the dirty clothes? Just the dirty clothes. They wanted all the dirty clothes because they figured it would smell like him. Dirty drawers and all. They just wanted it. She told them no. No. Absolutely not. My daughter then asked could she have a couple of his jerseys, because anyone that knew him knew that he loved those football and basketball and you know how men wear their jerseys. She gave my daughter two. And my daughter asked could she have this cologne that he always wore, which would remind her of her dad and she could spray it on it, and she said no. At that point, my son being the oldest, because at the time my daughter was about 18 and by the time he died, is 26. My son was about 25 or 26. So he was like, come on, Amber, let's go. You know, this is ridiculous. So they left and pretty much that was the end. Now, the forgiveness is I forgave him time and time again. Because if I had not forgiven him, I could have turned our kids, these kids that loved him, against him if I was a vindictive bitch. But I'm not. I have a forgiving heart. And also, like I said, you can't carry that hatred around because it eats you inside like a cancer. The person may not even know that you're hating them. And you're being slowly eaten away in the inside, and they're going on living their lives not even knowing that you're hating them. But in the end, I don't believe that what he said, that God was punishing him for all the hurt that he had caused us. I really don't believe that the God that I love works that way. I believe that fate, and I don't know if that's part of God and, you know, that was his retribution, but I just thought what goes around comes around, kind of. I wasn't the only person he had hurt in life, and I think in the end he had made his peace. And, you know, anybody that he felt that he had hurt, I think he had contacted them and he made peace directly with that person, and he sought their forgiveness and he got it. So I think in my forgiveness story, I will say this. Forgiveness did not come easy. I agree with Kim. It did not come easy. But once you have forgiven, you are released. Forget about what that other person did to you. Forgiveness is not for them. It is for you. And with that, everyone, I'm going to end this because I have talked way longer than what I intended, and I'm not editing anything. I'm just going to put it out there like it is. If y'all don't want to hear all of it, skip to the parts that are interesting to you. I'm sorry. You guys have a great Friday. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.